Here's another framing effect. Here are 4 lagers. There's Tesco Value Lager. They're about the same strength, although not completely. Tesco Value Lager at 30p. If I'd known you could buy that, I wouldn't be here this evening. But anyway, there you go. Carling at £1, Budweiser at £2, and then a premium Blanc wheat beer, Kronenberg 1664 at £4. Okay? Take the same people basically in a shop. Leave out that one. Okay? No, actually, sorry, leave out the 2 extremes. 33% of people buy the cheap one, 67% of people buy the £2 one. £1, £2, 2-to-1 ratio. Chuck in the cheap one, nobody buys it, but whoops, look what happens, 47% of people now buy the £1 one and only 53% buy the Budweiser. Suddenly, the presence of that 8 ace has made the purchase of a £1 lager more acceptable than it would be in the absence. Okay? Third experiment, remove the Tesco lager and put the £4 lager on the shelf. 10% of people now buy the £4 lager, 90% buy the Budweiser and 0% buy the Carling. It's basically wine listonomics, which is nobody buys the cheapest bottle of wine on the wine list because you don't want to look mean. And also, incidentally, if you go to one of those insurance comparison websites, nobody buys the cheapest insurance, particularly if it's from an obscure brand, but often even if it's from quite a reasonably well-known brand, people actually go to the 2nd or 3rd cheapest. It's a bit like Sherlock Holmes advising Dr. Watson, when you come out of Baker Street, don't take the 1st cab, because that could be Moriarty with a cosh, that's a trap, take the 2nd cab. People instinctively actually head for the middle. But actually, where the middle is, of course, depends on what you put above it and below it. If you're a restaurateur, you can make money putting a £500 bottle of wine on a wine list, even if you never sell a single bottle of that wine. It's there for its framing value. Disproportionality, brilliant idea of Dick Thaler's, which I haven't got time to explain. Here's one I have. That tiny thing costs nothing, the member since date. It's probably been worth 100 million to American Express since they first created it. Why? Because if you ever mistakenly send someone a replacement card which should say member since 85, and you send them a card that says member since 10, between 1/3 and 1/2 of people complain and demand that the card's reinstated. So how many people are continuing to pay the fee because they can't face going back to year 0? It's an interesting thought that it has an inherent emotional reward for continuity. And yet it costs absolutely nothing. Now, here's another one. This is the wording of a form. This is all characteristic of cloud systems, that tiny interventions, the butterfly's wings, can have disproportionately huge, not always predictable, but disproportionately huge effects. Here is how many people agree to give their organs in the event of an accident. The only variable is how you phrase the question. Is it... we assume you're willing to give your organs. If no, tick here. You get about 90% saying yes. Are you willing? If yes, tick here. You get about 10, 20, 30%. If you do it half and half, yes or no, you get about 66%. But how you frame the question, whether it's an opt-in, an opt-out, or a yes-no managed choice, has this enormous effect on the number of people who are prepared to actually give their organs up. One of Dick Thaler at Chicago's great successes was getting the Illinois Department of Motor Transportation to change the question from an opt-in to a managed choice of yes, no. We answer completely differently if we're presented with a choice in a slightly different way. There are examples with The Economist, a great Economist subscription experiment, which was the dummy option. Give people the choice of online-only subscription to The Economist, £40, paper and online, £100. 2/3 of people choose online only. If you do online only, £40, paper only, £100, paper and online, £100. Understandably, nobody chooses the middle one, except they're extreme Luddites. What now happens is that about 2/3 of people now choose paper plus online, because they see that if you buy the paper copy, you get the online one for free. So the whole frame of reference totally changes the way people decide. Now, the importance of that in web design, in form filling, another example of disproportionality on the web, if you can reduce the checkout procedure at an e-tailer from 3 clicks to 2, your sales go up by about 30%. That's what I mean about clouds being massively subject to disproportionality. And equally in disproportionality, tiny, tiny things can have huge effects. This is Virgin Atlantic upper class. These are the salt and pepper shakers. And your first reaction when you see these is, I'm going to nick those. And as you pick them up, embossed on the other side, it actually says, under the feet, it says, pinched from Virgin Atlantic upper class. So that little moment of recognition creates a moment of empathy that you've remembered for years after you can remember whether you're on a 747 or an Airbus. You know, those are the kind of decisions that clock people agonise about, which planes do you buy. What human cloud people actually remember is the joke underneath the salt and pepper shakers. Buckminster Fuller, great advocate of what he calls trim tab solutions. The trim tab is a tiny little thing on the back of a rudder. Moving it only a small way has an enormous effect on the movement of the ship. And his little thing on his grave says, "Call me Trim Tab." He must have been a nice bloke because his wife died only 3 days after him. But his point was that in a kind of cloud and complex world, we don't spend nearly enough time looking for these things. Because of our obsession, particularly with clock people's obsession with certainty and predictability, what we should be doing is actually saying, I don't know which one of these 10 is going to work, but the one that does is going to easily pay for the other 9. That's the way this stuff works. The cost of putting the thing on the American Express card, trivial, negligible. The value, it's been hundreds of millions of dollars. I'll skip that one. It's a mess, but what it does do is it generates black swan successes. If you have a decent measure of testability and experimentation. Now here's my final point. This is a lesson from Donatella Meadows, who is the late Donatella Meadows, who's a great environmental thinker and systems thinker. And systems thinking is very much about clouds, mechanisms that are too complex simply to be controlled by any one input or any one metric. These are her 12 ways, I think it's 12 ways, to change a system for the better. They're in reverse order. Constraints, parameters, numbers, taxes, standards, metrics is the worst way to do it, or the least effective way to do it. Size of buffers, gain around positive feedback loops. This is pretty technical stuff. I don't understand it myself. Power to add, change, or evolve, or self-organize system structure. The single two greatest things by far are changing the mindset of the system and changing the paradigm and the power to transcend paradigms. Now that is, again, in a cloud world, that's a kind of advertising and marketing job. Can you actually reframe what it's about? Can you make a train journey about comfort, not duration? The Eurostar, I don't think 6 billion is a great way, to be absolutely honest, to actually reduce a journey by 30 minutes. Leisure travellers don't mind how long the journey is. Frankly, business travellers would have benefited far more if you put Wi-Fi on the bloody thing. To be honest, that would have cost you about 1% of the overall cost, and it would have actually made your 3-hour journey useful and possibly fun. Now, that is a terrible solution to a problem because no one actually thought, can we at all change the paradigm of rail travel? Now, no one actually says of the Orient Express, I wouldn't go on it, it's too bloody slow. The fact is, you could make that journey pleasant, as I said, with supermodels and Chateau Lafite, at a tiny fraction of the cost spent by engineers making it shorter. Here's another paradigm change. Now, I thought I was mad in suggesting this, but there's a professor at Berkeley I discovered who said the same thing. You could change the paradigm of tax so people consider it a privilege to pay it rather than the burden. Now, you're looking at me and going, I'm mad, okay? Let me just explain. When you sell a car, the top of the range car probably costs only about 15% more to manufacture than the bottom of the range car. But people willingly pay 2 or 2.5 times as much to drive it as they pay to drive the bottom of the range car. The component of that car, which is status and other emotional factors, becomes higher and higher, and the status of the car that's a form of transportation becomes less and less. My very simple theory, if government built in a few relatively trivial perks and privileges for people paying higher rates of tax, it would change the mentality. My first suggestion, if you're paying 50% tax, you can drive in the bus lanes. And it would rebrand them as jag lanes, which would make them more aspirational as well. But I'm only half joking in this, by the way. I thought this was slightly mad, but the Berkeley professor is absolutely convinced that if you change just some of the symbolism and the imagery around tax payment, which is that avoiding it is that actually to pay a higher rate of tax is something the government is delighted about, and in a few ways we want to reward you, rather than going, rich bastard, I'll have you. It completely changes the mentality by which we pay something. After all, we've all paid a lot of money for not much substantial gain if it comes with sort of status or other differentiating perks. If anybody can think of a few more perks, NHS waiting rooms with up-to-date magazines, that kind of thing, do let me know. This is a brilliant case of changing the paradigm. The dot matrix display, this is a very bad picture, it's a French one, on the London Underground. The single biggest improvement in passenger experience per pound spent was nothing to do with trains or engineering, it was installing dot matrix digital display boards. Because someone realised that what makes a journey annoying or pleasant may not be the duration of the wait, it may be the uncertainty. That's a paradigm shift. Actually, the understanding that I'm actually much happier waiting 8 minutes for a train if I know it's 8 minutes and I can see it counting down than standing waiting for 4 minutes going, where's this bloody train, it's never going to come, I'm sure they've all vanished. That actually understanding, now that is actually applicable to NHS waiting lists. That if actually you gave people, if you rebranded the waiting list, are people paranoid about NHS? Let's put to one side people in genuine and extreme pain. But are people partly bothered about the waiting list because it makes them feel unimportant? First of all, the fact that you have to wait. And secondly, the fact that there is uncertainty that when they get a bit nearer to that date, it will yet again be postponed. Okay. If you reframed that period as preparation for your operation and you emailed them, wrote to them or texted to them every day, actually saying, here are 3 things you can do today to help prepare for your operation, can you actually change that and actually make the wait a benefit rather than a curse? After all, when people have a waiting list for a car, it's evidence of that car's desirability. Interestingly, when people have a waiting list for a hospital, it's evidence that the hospital is shit. Something needs to be done here because patently human psychology is working in 2 completely different directions on the same thing. Next book recommendation, it's fantastic, by the Chicago professor. Other thoughts of changing the paradigm. McDonald's changed the paradigm. The American diner was all about range of choice. They said, we'll cut the range, it's all about speed, instantaneous gratification. They changed the frame of reference by which, people felt a food place should be judged. My argument is, they complain people don't spend enough in the UK, but there are hundreds of ways we can impulse buy, but there's no single way we can impulse save. If there were a button on the wall of your house, every time you pressed it, it went, and you put £50 into your pension, my contention is you'd all save £50 more a month than you do currently. You might do it while you're pissed, but let's face it, you shop on eBay when you're pissed anyway. Context, hugely important. This is a nice example of a poster, digital poster that changes when there's a traffic jam. It talks about trains in terms of traffic jams. When it's Thursday, it talks about going home this weekend for your mother's roast. There's not a single clock in that whole thought. It's absolute cloudiness at its very highest, but spectacularly successful campaign. It gets people to reappraise someone, it gets someone to reevaluate something, and then the value is created. In the best place, in fact the only place that value is created, which is inside the head. So I genuinely say, one of the most exciting things to a group like yours is that to do any of this stuff and to deliver real value to clients does not actually require huge media budgets. Anybody can play at this. Anybody can go along and have an idea that costs $50 to implement but is worth millions. One of my latest suggestions was saying, very simply, all online banking websites make the mistake as soon as you log in of telling you your balance. Most people don't want to know. If you look at most people using a cash machine, they take the money out and they hope. They don't want to know. Why would you expose someone to pain every time they log in? It's like a clothes shop. Every time I walk in, they say, you're looking a bit fat today. Okay? You wouldn't do it. Okay? Yet financial institutions do it all the time. They start off the transaction by making you feel bad. I've got a friend who actually banks with Citibank. He's an American, but he walks an extra 50 yards to go to a NatWest cash machine because the bloody Citibank machine displays his balance on the screen and completely ruins the rest of his day. Now, my contention is, if you took that away and you made seeing your balance an option, not a default, you could arguably increase visits to websites by 50% and increase the amount of transactions that went on online instead of actually taking place face-to-face or via other means, and you could thereby actually save banks a fortune. The implementation of that, it's probably a few thousand quid. Now, I've yet to see anybody put this to the test. It might fail. I might be completely wrong. But my contention is there are hundreds and hundreds of cloud-like interventions out there. The reason we're not discovering them is actually that no one's looking for them. I always assumed in the advertising industry there were lots of other businesses that were doing it, and the reason we weren't doing it is because loads of other people had it actually taken care of. No one else is doing it at all. So if we can move in here and just understand this first, it's a spectacularly valuable thing that's independent of media expenditure, where you can deliver really, really good insight. And it's the kind of insight that plays to the boardroom as well as just to the marketing department. So that's my vision for the agency of the future, and it's effectively purveyors of cloud solutions. Not in the IT sense, but in the sense of the cloud that matters, which is that deeply ambiguous and unpredictable, but wonderfully disproportionate entity that's collective human behaviour. Thanks very much indeed.